We are currently recording on the brand new Canon G7X Mark III. This is an update to a pretty wildly popular camera that Canon has been running against Sony's other wildly popular camera line, the RX100 series. The big updates here is it's got a stacked CMOS sensor, uncropped 4K, and the really awesome thing, like you can hear right now, we are recording audio from a microphone internal to the G7X Mark III, which is, I mean, those are some pretty awesome things. But at the end of the day, it's just really not that good of a video camera. What's up everyone, I'm the Everyday Dad, and if I can figure it out, you can figure it out. So this camera is kind of a letdown. I mean, and that's not coming from somebody, I don't instinctively hate on Canon cameras. I mean, I'm a pretty big fan of Canon cameras. The M50 and the EOS R are two of my favorite cameras of all time, and I've made several videos praising them here on the channel, and I was very much looking forward to using the G7X Mark III to move away from my very beaten up and getting old RX100 Mark V, and I wanted to move into something with Canon's colors because I do like how they look. Now, before we do get too far into this video, I do want to say and thank my friends over at B&H Photo for loaning me the G7X Mark III for the next few weeks to make these series of videos about. Now, if you'd like to get your very own, because I do think it will be okay for a stills camera, there will be links in the description below. Now, boiling this all down to its most basic building blocks, this video is basically saying the G7X Mark III is a great camera, but it's got great colors, but the autofocus is still unchanged from the G7X Mark II. It's got uncropped 4K, but it doesn't have a single way to record in 24 frames per second. It's got a microphone in port, but there's no way to mount a microphone to it. Plus, and we'll talk way more about this later, I'm having significant heat issues here. Not just overheat and then doesn't work, which I mean, that's a thing with Sony's and it does happen here. But if I push this thing to overheating, the camera's 4K is basically useless for a long time. And by a long time, I mean 34 minutes today were spent from when the camera shut down from overheating to when the 4K would start working again. I mean, it's just a sad state for a camera that I was genuinely excited about. But again, we'll get much more in depth on these problems here in a moment. Now, if this is your first time hearing or seeing a video about the G7X Mark III, let's cover some basic video recording specs to get us all on the same page. Now, the G7 comes equipped with a 1-inch 20 megapixel stacked CMOS sensor. It can record up to 4K 30 frames per second and has some pretty darn impressive, for Canon, 1080p at up to 120 frames per second for slow motion. But like I said in the beginning, no 24 frames per second in either 720p, 1080p, or 4K. Doesn't work. One of the advantages that this does have over something like the RX100 Mark IV, which, yes, you heard me correctly, the most accurate competitor to the brand new G7X Mark III is the comparatively ancient Sony RX100 Mark IV. I mean, on the spec sheet, it can record 4K in up to 10-minute increments at a time. And spoilers, I'm not actually getting that though. Well, we'll see. We're recording in 4K now. We're at 4 minutes. Let's find out. It does have a built-in full-frame equivalent 24 to 100 millimeter lens that is 1.8 at the wide and 2.8 at the zoom. Now, under the hood is Canon's current top-of-the-line Digic 8 image processor. All of Canon's current top-end stills cameras have this processor, which is pretty nice. And for autofocus, I don't know if you've noticed this or not, but it is unfortunately missing Canon's reliable dual pixel autofocus, and in this case, it only has the contrast-based autofocus, and that's both 1080p and 4K. Canon, it's not like an M50 thing where it does 1080p with dual pixel autofocus. It doesn't have it at all. Now, of the three things that I think a camera must be able to do to be recommended as a YouTube or online content camera, the first is video quality. Now, if you are a 30 frames per second shooter, this works okay. I mean, the image is fine, and like we've seen throughout the video, the G7 can actually look pretty decent in low light studio situations thanks to that pretty darn fast zoom lens. We're at like a 40mm equivalent right now, and we're at f2.5. And it works pretty well inside. The 4K is nice and sharp, and even the 1080p holds up pretty well. Now, the dynamic range is okay. I mean, this does seem to have a pretty old sensor inside of it, but if you were going to take family video, you'd be absolutely fine. Now, one of the biggest benefits you'll get when using this outdoors is the camera does have a built-in ND filter, which is just about my favorite addition that any camera ever could have. Like, I love built-in ND filters. I mean, nothing hurts more than using a camera with a built-in ND and then like giving it back. I mean, being able to just tap and get like legitimate exposure control is so much nicer than having to stop the aperture down or something like that. Now, like I did say in the beginning of the video, the image quality is fine, and that uncropped 4K is probably the first time I've seen Canon have uncropped 4K in a consumer level camera, but the autofocus is just bad. Like, I can't even defend it really here in the slightest, which, I mean, that shocks me because normally when I'm doing a Canon video, the autofocus is the thing that I don't have to worry about and can just rely on. My life is made so much easier when I know a camera is rocking dual pixel autofocus. I mean, that and Sony's new phase detection system are honestly tools that I would never ever want to give up. And the G7X Mark III having the Digic 8 image processor inside of it, I mean, it should be able to have DPAF, that's dual pixel autofocus, in 4K. Now, my assumption here is why it's missing is to save the battery life, as it's just got that teeny tiny little battery in there. But I'd rather have a shorter period of full functionality than saving camera battery for a camera that I wouldn't want to use because it's just not as easy as I need it to be. That brings me to the next problem, 24 frames per second, and I have zero idea what Canon's problem is. Now, earlier this year when the EOS RP was announced with 24 frames per second and 1080p missing, I just kind of figured it was an oversight for their engineers, and even when I went to talk to Canon at NAB this year, the salesman even admitted that it was an auto mission because the internals should be able to handle it on all of their newer cameras. I mean, cameras from like 10 years ago can do it. So this is now the third camera I've used from Canon, the EOS RP, the SL3, the G7X Mark III, that does not have a 1080p 24 frames per second mode. Why? Why? I mean, even though I'm not personally somebody that uses 24 frames per second, I mean, that is a deal breaker for anyone that considers themselves to be a pro videographer or online, and I use this word in protest, cinematographer. Like, it's dumb. And the only reason I can think of to omit this is to make people buy more expensive or legacy cameras. But Canon just, I mean, they're not the only game in town anymore. You can buy cameras from all the other brands that do more and cost less. I mean, I just don't get it. If you don't want people to use these for video, then don't include a 3.5mm audio jack and just don't have the video functionality at all. Like, I would then not complain or use this camera, and you wouldn't have a bunch of people like whining about this. If you want it to be a stills camera, have it be a stills camera. Speaking of that audio, back on track, yeah, it's the most important part of video, and I'm actually happy to see it's included here. And what you've been hearing off and on throughout the video, and what you're hearing right now, is what it sounds like with the Rode VideoMic Pro Plus plugged straight into the G7X. And it sounds pretty good, and it is a welcome addition. Like, that can turn this into a studio camera because you don't have to record off camera. Let's put all of these thoughts and feelings into a coherent whole and hop outside for a quick video/vlogging test.
And welcome to the vlogging test of the Canon G7X Mark III. Check it out. Look how I love these tiny little packages. And something that I really like, and we'll talk more about this in ease of use, but I really like, can you see that? There's a record button on the screen itself. And I know you're saying, wow, that's crazy. There's a whole bunch of other ways to start recording, but I really like this screen. So, case in point, vlogging test begin. Whoa. Okay, so this is the vlogging test of the Canon G7X Mark III, and I'm not even in focus right now. Like that. There we go. And that's one of the big frustrations I have with this camera. Like, it should be an amazing vlogging camera. It's got decent stabilization. It's got the flip screen. It's got the microphone in jack that you heard inside how well it can work. But it's so frustrating. Like, I really like Canon cameras. The EOS R is one of my favorite cameras. The M50 is one of my favorite cameras. Like, they make fantastic cameras, but I do not understand the decisions that they've made here. Now, we are currently recording in 4K 30 frames per second. We are recording with the camera's built-in microphones because I still haven't decided an elegant solution for how we would hook up a microphone to this outside for like vlogging purposes. So you were hearing the audio that this can record with the Rode VideoMic Pro Plus inside, but out here I didn't have much. I still haven't figured it out. Now, as a camera, this does check a lot of the boxes, right? It's got decent colors. It's got 4K 30, longer than any of these Sony cameras I've used. I haven't used the RX100 Mark VII yet, so that might change. But it's got a lot of the right things. But Canon never... Motorcycle. We're all impressed with how loud his motorcycle is. But Canon can never win on specs. They never put the the cutting edge technology in their cameras. And that's what frustrates me so much, is because they should be it should be the easiest to use. And again, we'll talk more about this in ease of use, but like right here for vlogging, it's frustrating. It's frustrating when I started out and I wasn't in focus because it doesn't even have the dual pixel autofocus in it, which is the biggest thing that Canon has going for it, especially if you're gonna use it for like run and gun video shooting stuff. Like, so frustrating. The Canon G7X Mark III, wasted potential would be its movie title name. But okay, back to the video.
And we're back. I mean, this is such a nice camera to use, and it breaks my heart that it's got the feature set that it does. I mean, okay, so what matters most to me about a camera is how easy it is to use both before and after hitting record. And to talk about the physical use of the camera, it's actually really great. I like the body. I think the build quality is pretty good. It has a nice rubber grip around it. It is mostly plastic, but it's metal where it matters, like the hinge on the back. I mean, it's also very easy to handhold, and it's got just about the right number of buttons and dials to make operating it a breeze. Plus the screen on the back, the camera shut off due to overheating, so now the 4K is useless. So we are currently in the 1080p, so this is the 1080p image quality as a studio camera. Hooray! The screen on the back is fully touch enabled, which means while you're in front of the camera, you can control basically every setting without needing to turn it around. Now that's not as big of a deal for a point and shoot. I mean, it's a bigger deal for bigger cameras, but I really like that. I hate having to get up, walk behind a camera, or even like lose what I'm doing, turn the camera around to mess the settings. I really like this. I mean, something that I don't like about how this particular camera's way of having that set up is, for some reason when I want to tap the exposure triangle, like the shutter speed, the aperture, the ISO on the bottom, it is kind of harder to do and doesn't work as well. I don't remember that being a problem on the Mark II, but it is definitely not as easy to use as like the M50 or the SL line of cameras. Now, a new addition that I do like, and we mentioned out at the vlogging test, is the flip up screen has a record button on it. And that doesn't sound like that big of a deal, right? I mean, yes, you can actually record with the shutter button or the record button, but I've been using this more often than I thought I would, and I do kind of hope that more cameras include this in the future. It's nice. Now, after you hit record, not much changes here. There are 3 things that I look for post-record ease of use. A monitor, check. We've already mentioned the flip up screen. Stabilization, check. It's actually got pretty good lens IS and electronic IS built into it. It makes it a pretty darn stable point and shoot camera. Like, it's good. Autofocus, not a check. And I'm gonna uncheck that box. And since it's a Canon camera, that's so negligent, it almost makes me wanna go back and uncheck the other boxes just for the sheer cheek of this camera. So let's say you finish watching this video and say, "Everyday Dad, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm gonna use one of your very convenient affiliate links in the description below to go ahead and buy it anyway." So what does the ecosystem for this camera look like? Well, again, it's a point and shoot, so it's not designed to need anything else. You can't get new lenses or new battery grips or new anything else like that. I mean, it is an all-in-one package, for better or worse. In this case, worse, but buy more batteries. If you are gonna buy this camera, buy more batteries. These are tiny and they don't last very long. But at the end of the day, so what, right? So, like I said in the beginning, the G7X Mark III, I do not recommend. I don't think it's worth for video at all. I mean, I get it. It's a cool new point and shoot with an audio in jack. It costs half of the amount of the Sony RX100 Mark VII, which is Sony's camera that does the same thing. It's got the wider aperture lens, stacked CMOS sensor, good stabilization. I mean, all of those should come together to make a darn good camera that is very easy for me to recommend. Over $700 can get you a lot of other camera, even if you are looking for a secondary small travel camera. I mean, I bought my RX100 Mark V open box for like $400, and that's not a hard deal to find at all. I mean, the G7X Mark III is a weird mix of Canon ditching features, old tech, hype, and actually good features that, I mean, I just can't recommend it. It hurts, but I cannot recommend you. Thanks for watching.